Can you provide an introduction to who you are here at ASU?
My name is Amber Wutich, and I'm a President's Professor in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change. I'm an anthropologist, and I direct the Center for Global Health, and I'm the Associate Director of the Institute for Social Science Research. I also teach in our programs in environmental social sciences and global health.
What was your pathway to leadership?
I grew up in the 1980s, and it was an exciting time for women entering leadership. It was a time when women were showing that they could be leaders, and women were breaking new pathways forward in terms of being able to balance their roles as family members and leaders. However, many of the role models that I saw growing up as a little girl in the 1980s were people like Margaret Thatcher or Diane Keaton in her role in a movie where she was balancing being a high-powered businesswoman and having a baby. And these were not roles that I saw for myself. So as a young girl and even an early professional, I did not aspire to those kinds of leadership roles. I saw myself as a scholar first and foremost, and it didn't occur to me that there would be a role in leadership for me until I got my first research grant. At that time, I had to put together a team of people who had very disparate skills. So a translator, someone who was amazing at community-based outreach, another person who was a wonderful scholar. And I had to bring these people together and create a vision that inspired them and got them to work together doing their best work. And it was an amazing experience. Together we did research that no one had ever done before and really broke new ground for scholarship in my areas of research around water insecurity. And that was the first taste of leadership that really inspired me to do more. And it showed me that I didn't have to fall into old molds, that we could do new things with leadership and create new teams that change the world. And that was what made me want to pursue leadership, particularly in the realms of research administration.
So what made you passionate about equity?
If you were to ask my mother how I became passionate about equity and inclusion, she would tell you a story about when I was in second grade and I was asked to write an essay. At that time, I had been put in a gifted program, which was for advanced students. And the essay that I wrote railed against the injustices of students who tested high being put into separate programs and the lack of programs in public education to nurture other kinds of talents. So people who were amazing artists, people who were amazing musicians. And my mother always laughs and says that my commitment to equity was clear from when I was a very small person. However, I think that the models I had around me were incredibly influential. My mother was a feminist and very active in community-based organizations. My father was an environmentalist and a vegan and a union steward, and both my mother and my father were active as union participants in the labor movement. So for me, their commitment to equity was really foundational. And as I got older, the challenge was to grow in my understanding of the needs for equity in other realms beyond those of gender and class that I had been raised to understand so well. So trying to understand the dynamics of international inequities or inequities around race and ethnicity required me to read and talk and learn much more. And so that's one of my major commitments as a scholar.
So now you're talking to your younger self. What are some things that you would say to your younger self?
So in thinking about my younger self as someone who was trying to enter the academy when the chances to get a tenure track job for an anthropologist were very low, and particularly as a working class student on scholarships, I always felt that I had to push as hard as humanly possible to develop every skill, to get every line on my CV, or else I wouldn't have a chance. And I always hesitated to invest time in soft skills that weren't directly reportable or hireable. And I think I would go back and tell my younger self that the time that I spent on languages or on learning how to talk to people who were unlike me and developing my skills as a person and as a community member were time that was really well spent. It wasn't a waste. And all of that feeds into my ability to be a strong leader today. And I even think that I wish I had spent a little more time on certain tasks, like I never learned any Latin. I learned languages that I could speak to people, and if it wasn't something I could use to speak to others, I wasn't going to invest time in it. I think a strong foundation in Latin might have been more useful than I realized. Also, I learned the basic logic that I needed to create research designs and to do inferential analyses, but I wish I had spent more time doing basic logic. So I would tell myself that it would be okay to work on those skills and to even spend a little more time on them.
How do you see your current role in supporting equity?
Equity is an enormous passion of mine, and it's something that we need more of in the academy. So I think for anyone in a leadership role, it's absolutely essential that they have a commitment to equity, but how we enact that might differ from person to person. For me, I am very aware of my limitations to do everything that needs to be done. And so when I see myself as a leader who advances equity, I see the networks that I build and the relationships that I have as being essential to advancing equity. That means that if we're working on a project or we're trying to advance something in the university, we need to make ties to other people who have other nodes of networks and who can help us advance what we're working on. I may not be the expert on what Black women in the academy need, but I don't need to be. I need to have a network that reaches out to other scholars and other leaders who have those passions and can work collaboratively with me to advance equity on all fronts. That's just an example, but as you can imagine, there are enormous needs for all kinds of scholars and leaders who can work on equity, and so I see those networks and those connections and those relationships as being really foundational to the way that I advance equity as a leader.
Thanks. Do you have any final remarks that you'd like to make?
In terms of final remarks, what I would say is that to people contemplating a pathway into leadership today in the academy, it's so unlike what I experienced in the 1980s. We know that we urgently need to develop new leaders who can advance different areas of equity. So whatever your passion is, whatever groups you're seeking to help advance in the academy, there's a place for you, and I would encourage you to pursue leadership.